Well, hello. Old friends and new, not too much of the old, I hope, yeah? It's, for those who've appeared here since I was here last, it's probably 2.5 years ago, it's lovely to meet you as well. Do come up and say hello afterwards and all the rest. Sharon sends her love for the rest of you who know her. The children decided they all had a social life, so we decided not to all come together this morning. They're all kind of doing different things and church life and things around where we live, which is now down, I like to call it Hampshire, other people call it Slurry, it's just on the border down there. And we see a lot of you in different ways. Some of you came down in January to the annual grassroots thing, because since we were here 12 years ago when we moved house, we made a decision that we would focus our ministry not so much on running church and things like that, but that we would run this thing called Grassroots, which is ministries all over the world. It's easy on a day like today when you've been looking at the news on the radio. I don't know if you listen to the news on the radio, but it repeats the same news over and over and over again. And so the word "the" before news becomes quite significant. And you begin to think this is the news. Well, actually, there's loads more news. There's loads of other things happening in your life and my life all over the world. Good things, bad things. And we could actually stop any one of us and say, what's happening in your life. Now, it might be interesting or it might not be interesting. That's a separate issue. But the reality is there's loads of different things that are good around the world. So part of my joy of being able to talk is to tell you some of mine. So there you go. It's one of the glorious things about a microphone is that you can answer back here, I've noticed, over the years. So if you do, that's fine. And I will attempt to not look too displeased, and life will go on. You know, that's how it works. So if you want to interrupt, please feel free. The last couple of weeks for me have been quite interesting. We got a new website going. I don't know if you've ever done that, but there's something about it which is really quite miraculous. You have a couple of emails and conversations with somebody, and then suddenly your whole world changes. Well, it's just your website, but it feels like that, and you've been working on it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And changing things, and suddenly everybody who's meeting you, and in the old days a website didn't matter at all, but today it does, because if it's not mobile friendly, people don't think you're cool. So anyway, we got this thing up and running, and in the next few days we got lots of new people sponsoring children in Tanzania. And I just thought that was amazing, that it should actually work. So it might not sound like terribly exciting news in comparison to Syria, Stockholm, Boris Johnson not going to Russia, and Donald Trump deciding that he's going to shake the world. But in my little world, I was sitting there going, thank you, Jesus. And it didn't cost very much as well, which was also good. At the same time, pretty much 24 hours later, I published a book. And this was one of those strange things. Well, I'm no good as a writer. I'm quite good as a talker. But as a writer, I'm not. But I talked to a friend of mine, and we ended up in a situation where he said, we've got to write a book together. Can you write some of it? So all the good bits are him, and all the other stuff is me. But it's only a Kindle book, but it's available out there, and it's about making disciples. It's not a Rich and Judy bestseller, I can assure you. It is designed for church people to ask the question, why haven't we made disciples? Or have we made disciples? Or what could we do to make disciples? After all, Jesus said, and this is where we get back to today's message. Jesus said, immediately after Palm Sunday, Good Friday, Easter, and just before the resurrection, the ascension, Jesus said, as you go, make disciples of all peoples, and baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey everything I commanded you. And it's known as the Great Commission, and it's basically what the church is for. There's lots of other things. You know, we as the church are meant to do everything in the world. But the actual thing, the organization of the church, and those of us who are trying to do the church thing, is to make disciples. So it's the bottom line of what we're supposed to achieve. And the question, so I'm asking the question in the book, and Andy as well is asking the question in the book. What is a disciple? Are you one? Where are you in the process of being made one? Have you been made one? Can you ever be made one? And it goes through a few elements like that. So please feel free to get hold of that. That's the other end of Easter. Today's passage has got an element of disciples in it too, and we're going to come to that in a moment. Before I finish my little kind of preamble around all of this stuff, I just wanted to say thank you for all of you who do support children and in different parts of the world. This stuff here is the kind of stuff you'll find on the website and is our public persona. We have to have two different parts of our thinking. One half of it is to say this is what we do and everybody's meant to know about it and actually helps if everybody knows about it. And then there's another part of what we do where if anybody knows about it, it's really quite unhelpful. So at some point, quite soon, I'm going to give a nod and we're going to turn off the tape. I thought it would be quite good if we had something on the tape for those people who've decided to go to America this weekend or whatever, so that they could listen to something and then they'll have to realise that they had to be here if they wanted to hear the rest. So we'll do that in a moment. But thank you for those who support children. It is amazing how God seems to lead. It's not about making a difference in your community and making a difference in other people's lives is not about working hard. You sometimes have to work hard, but it's not about working hard. It's about following what God does with you. When we first moved from here into our local community, my children went to the local school, and the deputy head, who was year 6 teacher, was a chap called Richard, who was a Christian. And we quite liked him. He was a cheery kind of person who, in the summer term, he'd have water gun fights with his kids and things like that. And I always think a teacher should be that kind of fun type of person as well as really ruthless with SATs. Don't you agree? So what I would do is we'd walk around the community and we were trying to work out what is it that God wants us to do here. We were traveling into Africa and other places when we were working, and then we were sitting in our office to organize people's money to go to those places. But what did God want us to do in a village on the Hampshire-Surrey border? And we had people saying to us, which church have you taken over? And that would seem like a kind of rude way of accusing us of being that kind of people. And so I would say to them, I don't want to take over anybody else's church. Everybody's got a calling. They're meant to be doing what they're doing. I'd quite like to take over the world. And then that didn't sound right either. So again, I would spend my time walking around our village and praying that God would, our kids were going to the school, we were being friendly to neighbours, because we're all meant to do that, aren't we? But what is it that we're supposed to do? And on one of my walks around the village, I thought the Lord said to me, invite Richard to come to Tanzania on one of the trips. Not that I'm doing, but Sharon's doing. And so that's what we did. We contacted the school. We said, we would like to invite your deputy head, Richard, to come to Tanzania with Sharon as part of a group, and we'll cover his costs. Had no idea why it would matter. You might say, well, why don't you ask the head? Well, the head had just been somewhere else, and I'd had a strange conversation where she'd said it'd been really good fun, but I don't know what to do with it now as a school. And I was pretty sure that if Richard came to Tanzania and saw our amazing team over there and got involved with all the kids in the schools over there, we would know what to do out of it. And anyway, it was all agreed that he would go. And just as it was agreed that he was going and we'd bought the air tickets, the head resigned. There was a process of interviews and he became the head. In fact, he officially became the head the day after he left to go to Tanzania, which is a pretty amazing moment. And he then came back and we then linked his school with a school in Tanzania. But partly because he was a Christian, he was a bit nervous at kind of pushing the Christian side. So for quite a few years, it's been quite a quiet relationship with the school. And about a year ago, he decided that he would leave and became a head somewhere else. And I was thinking, I wonder if that was what God told us to do. And then another teacher who is not a Christian believer applied to become the head and actually contacted us and said, this link with the school in Tanzania, I'd like to make that a really important part of my pitch of becoming the head. And so she came over to us and talked through the Christian thing. She's totally open to Jesus. She's very happy for Christianity to happen. She just doesn't, Even though she's a really bright person, the idea of actually it landing and it making any sense to her specifically, it's like, oh. Anyway, that's one of the weird things about life. And so she got made the head of the school on the basis of this pitch. And about 4 weeks ago, it was then arranged for her to go to Tanzania and meet the school that they're linked with, along with another teacher, both not believers. They had an absolutely amazing week. I picked them up from the airport and was driving them home with Sharon. And I said to them, what was your best bit? Church, they said. It was fantastic. If there were churches like that in England, I would go. And it's gone on from there. The head stood up in school and said, I would like you all to sponsor a child. And she sent an email. This is a really important part of our relationship as a school to Tanzania. If you'd like to sponsor a child, I'd really encourage you to do so. And that was part of the reason why all these sponsorships turned up the moment we had a new website. They were all people in our local community. We've had people all the way up and down our streets coming and knocking on our doors saying, oh, I'm so excited about what we're doing. We've adopted another child. Well, you haven't quite. It's £3.50. But, so it's been amazing. We've had a week of suddenly connecting. So now we're going to do the village fair. Have you done, you know what I mean by village fair? The village fair. We will have a stall on May Bank holiday, which means it will rain because it's May Bank holiday. It always rains on May Bank holiday, doesn't it? Yes, it can be sunny the day before and sunny the day after, but it will rain on May Bank holiday, but we're ready for it. We have got all the technology in place. But again, it's just being involved in the community. And the amazing thing is that talking about this stuff and talking about Jesus just flows from one to the other and back. And intriguingly, Richard, who was the Christian, would always kind of downplay it and downplay it and downplay it. Here's somebody who doesn't really have a Christian faith. The Christian church over there is so fantastic. She's saying this to all the kids, and we're going to sing songs. And you just sit there and think, this is quite extraordinary. We've also got a new vicar. Vicars are funny old folks, aren't they? Got a new vicar. He believes in Jesus. It's really exciting in our community. And so he's one of the board of governors in this. Oh, I'm just so excited. This might not be the news of Syria and stuff, but in our little community, it's the news. There you go. So that's the beginning. Let's do a bit of Bible, shall we? So I'm going to do it from Luke. Is that all right? The Luke bit of Palm Sunday, which starts in Luke 19, verse 28. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead to Jerusalem. So he's obviously just said stuff. You kind of get that. It's a parable, actually. He went on ahead to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone says to you, why are you untying it? Say, the Lord needs it. Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, why are you untying the colt? They replied, the Lord needs it. They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. So he went along. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. I tell you, he replied, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. Father, I pray that you'd take the word and me and this bunch of people, and that you'd move your spirit upon us and you'd say what you need to say this morning. These are your people. This is your place. Come and tell us what you want to tell us. Move in us in the ways that you need to move in us. change us in ways that you need to change us so that we can transform the world. Amen. So I said to Sally, I kind of talk about this as two bookends. And that's because there are three myths in this story that everybody that I've ever met seems to believe about Palm Sunday. The first one is that Jesus had some kind of miraculous knowledge that there would be a cult there. And sent them ahead like, there's a cult round the corner over there. Now, it's possible that that is true, but he didn't need miraculous knowledge. He could have arranged it a few weeks ahead. But I don't think so, because I think the passage gives the impression that he didn't arrange it a few weeks ahead, because they do seem a bit confused. But at the same time, there is a sense in which they come and start untying the colt. They say the Lord needs it, and everybody goes, fine. Isn't that true? You know, this is an extremely valuable piece of equipment, a colt, by the way. Well, it's a kind of horse. Well, it's a donkey and a horse who've had sex together and had a baby. That's a colt, you know. So it's actually a rough horse or a pretty cool donkey. You know, it's one way or another. They're pretty difficult to ride, I'm told. But if you've never ridden them before and you get on them, you will end up on your back. So if this was an unbroken colt, which is the impression from the text, the fact that Jesus got on it, or as it says in this text, that he was dumped on it by the others, because it says they put him on it. There is somebody who I met who said that he talked to somebody about this who looked after colts in that part of the world today. And if this was an unbroken colt and Jesus sat on it and that colt didn't jump, the way this young man put it is he must have had amazing hands. There must have been something about his hands on that colt's neck that made that colt just go peaceful. So actually, it's possible that the miracle was that he wasn't lying on his back. But there's another possibility here about this arrangement. You see, it's in the Bible, in Zechariah, isn't it? That Jesus would enter. You know, Jesus knows Jesus is the Messiah. The rest of the people are still a bit confused by that. But he knows he's the Messiah, and he knows this is the day that he's got to enter Jerusalem on the colt the foal of a donkey, because it said so in Zechariah. Therefore, there must be one, mustn't there? Obvious. So he doesn't need to know because he's read the Bible. If you read the Bible and you find the bit that's about you, you can, it's a little bit easy to know what's going to happen next, isn't it? You don't actually have to have a supernatural revelation because you've got a supernatural revelation. Yeah? So Jesus reads Zechariah, goes, this is what's happening today. Therefore, there's going to be a colt. Go and find it and bring it back, mate. And they do it. And it makes sense. Myth number 2, humility. Humility is a funny word. Because we know that Jesus rode it in humility because he was humble. But some people have said, isn't he humble? He's not on a great big white horse with a great big army behind him. He's just on a colt, the foal of a donkey, riding into Jerusalem. You see, there's a problem with that. Is if he'd been on a white horse with a great big army behind him, all he'd have been is one of the kings of the earth. But if he rides on a colt, the foal of a donkey, into Jerusalem, according to Zechariah, he's the Messiah, the King of heaven. Therefore, it's not that much, it's a bit of a down thing to be a king of the earth, isn't it? So in saying to everybody, I'd like the colt, the foal of a donkey, to ride in, he's not claiming to be less than somebody on a great big horse. He's claiming to be more. And everybody knows it. So this is actually one of the most amazing PR stunts. Because he's read the Bible. The Bible says the Messiah is going to walk into Jerusalem and he's going to be on the back of a colt and be humble. And in his humility, he claims to be the King of heaven. Cool. I mean, that's quite cool to do that in humility. I mean, of all the things to do in humility, that is cool. Don't you agree? So the myth here is not that the myth is that he's being so humble in a kind of Uriah Heep kind of humble. This is the humbleness of being who you are and being happy to present that to the world. It's back to the old Nelson Mandela phrase, which is particularly important in the context of the news at the moment with Jacob Zuma, who needs to go, in case you're praying. And Nelson Mandela saying, real humility is stepping up and presenting yourself to the world and not having so much self-consciousness that you don't. Why does your self-consciousness matter so much when you have been given gifts to present to the world? Jesus gets on that colt and rides into Jerusalem, claiming to be the Messiah, the King, coming in all his glory, which is humility. And everybody knows it, and that's why there's a crowd down the street. The reason they pick up their old palm leaves. I cut a conifer down yesterday outside our front door. It was a pretty foul conifer, but it did give me amazing fronds of conifer. It wouldn't have been palm. And I thought, I could bring that into church tomorrow. And I was going to fill the car with it, and then it stunk. It was so foul, I'm just going to burn it instead. Anyway, there we go. So this is much nicer. Thank you, David. They got excited on a big scale because in some ways Jesus consistently, when anybody put him on the spot of, are you the Messiah or aren't you, he'd always use a parable or a riddle just to keep everybody off his back. At the same time as saying yes, he also said, but you can't prove I just said yes. And this is another of those. He's got on a colt, the foal of a donkey, and he's riding it in. And the Pharisees are saying, he's claiming to be the king. And they're going, are you claiming to be the king? And he's going, it's up to you. What do you think? And it's so clear that he is claiming to be the king, but at the same time, it's not clear that he is. Do you see what I mean? Because he's only riding a colt. After all, lots of people ride colts, don't they? So anyway, that's myth number 2. Neither of those myths desperately matter, but they're interesting in the text. The third one does matter. And that is that I've heard people, this is a funny week in the church's year. You can think about Palm Sunday and Easter and Good Friday in between any time you like. You don't have to do it this week. Did you know that? It's not just the thing for this week, but we like to do it. We use the church's year to remind ourselves of particular festivals. This week is an odd week. It's a big high, Palm Sunday. There's an enormous crowd worshipping Jesus. It's a wonderful high, Easter Sunday. It's a quiet day, but he's just risen from the dead. In the middle is about the lowest low, which is called Good Friday. Because even though it's the lowest low, it's the best thing that ever happened to the world. So it's an odd week, isn't it? We were talking just beforehand about the old allotment, weren't we? In the prayer meeting before, we were talking about allotments that happen to have half decent soil and half clay. Real world is made that way, isn't it? There's Palm Sundays and there are Easter Sundays and there are Good Fridays in all our lives. So it's a strange week. But I've heard people regularly say this. The disciples who were up and down the street, the crowd up and down the street, waving their palm leaves, saying how wonderful Jesus was on the night of, the night of Thursday night and Friday morning were the crowd who were then saying, crucify him, crucifying. How fickle are people? It's not true. There is a word, crowd, which is found in both texts. But if you read this Luke version of it, it's clear that the people who were the disciples of Jesus, notice the making disciples thing? The disciples of Jesus were overjoyed and waving the palm fronds. It was not them who ended up as the crowd who said, crucify, crucify. They ended up hiding when other people were shouting, crucify, crucify. The word crowd, which relates to the people who said, crucify, crucify, are the Pharisees and Sadducees and their cronies. That's a crowd. But it's not the same crowd. It was the crowd who were prepared to turn up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and say crucify because they were all part of that in crowd. This bunch were the out crowd, like us. Yeah? This bunch were the people who had the miracles happen in their lives. And it's interesting that their joy wasn't because Jesus was on the colt, the foal of a donkey, and about to take over the world. It was because of the miracles they'd seen. Now, I don't think there's any really good reason as a Christian to be overjoyed and excited about God if he doesn't do anything. Isn't that true? Religion is about worshipping God who doesn't do anything. In other words, we keep coming to church because it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. My friend would say, we've got a deep joy. We don't need to have this overwhelming joy thing. And this chap who I knew years ago, I'd say, why is that? He said, we've got a deep joy. It's deep, deep down. It's fine. I'd say, no, a deep joy is not good enough. I don't mind a deep joy, but it's got to come out in some way. But it doesn't actually come out unless stuff happens. Isn't that true? And I've been in quite a lot of church services where actually it's all been about either listening to me or listening to you or listening to somebody else play the music and trying to do a good church service. I don't really care about that anymore. I'm really much more interested in whether God did something. So we're going to make sure we do a bit of God. That is a great clock now. When I was here, it used to go round. Doesn't it? The fact that it hasn't gone round means that the time hasn't run out. Isn't that amazing? Anyway, at some point, we're going to stop and we're going to pray because we need God to do stuff, because that's when it becomes interesting. So the disciples got excited because God did stuff then, and the disciples who were known as the disciples and the ones that got made disciples were the ones who got excited because God was doing something. After Jesus had risen from the dead, God was doing stuff. The people who follow Jesus are people who actually follow the living Jesus and know a personal relationship with him today and are expecting him to do stuff, not people who just obey all the rules of being a nice Christian. We expect him to do things. The things that excite me, I've prayed for a few people and they've got healed. Not many over the years. And I've often thought that God was going to heal someone and he hasn't. And then I prayed for other people and thought, well, he wouldn't, and then he has. And I've been excited particularly about the ones when he has and confused by the ones when he hasn't. I don't know if that's been your experience. There have been other ones when I just didn't know, and that's life, and I've prayed because you're meant to pray. But I tell the stories of the days when I really didn't expect God to do something, but God did something that I couldn't do. Some of you know Dan Penn, who used to come here. I remember getting a message from him and Joe, please come and pray in the hospital because Dan had something really, really nasty, which they were basically saying he was going to die of, as far as I understand. And I just felt depressed. So the last thing I wanted to do was go and pray and then him die. It's just somehow it all oppressed me. But they specifically asked me to come, so I thought, okay. And as I went, I just said, Lord, what do I say? So just ask him what you should pray. So I said to him, what should I pray? Pray that I will be healed, because God has told me when you pray, I will be healed, said Dan. So I prayed, God, you've heard of his faith. I didn't tell him I hadn't got any at all. And prayed, and he was completely healed. And, it's a longer story than that. But it was, for me, it was like, wow! It was, faith is expecting God to do something. Well, my experience is that when I expect God to do something, quite often he doesn't. But when I don't expect it, I have faith. That's odd, isn't it? So, anyway, maybe just Dan had the faith and just did what God told him to do. I don't know. But it was a cool thing. And it happened in Barnet, for those of you who are interested. Barnet Hospital, imagine. Yeah. God does stuff. Some of you know my son. We all know that he was, those of you who knew my son when he was a baby, he wasn't going to live. But he's alive today. He's taking his GCSEs. He's not very pleased about that. When he was about 1.5, they told us he will never eat because he can't swallow food. So he's had a tube for a very long time. Last summer, his consultant down in Southampton, who had already treated him for colonitis and had decided about 2 years before that they would take out his bowel because he had colonitis, and the story is too complicated to go into, but a week before they were going to take his bowel out, I had a heart attack, so they couldn't take his bowel out. So that meant that there was a delay. Sharon had asked them if they could check his bowel to see if it had been healed because we'd had a wonderful time of prayer over him. Because I had the heart attack, they had to do another check 2 weeks later. When they did the check 2 weeks later, they said his bowel was completely back to normal. So this doctor said to us, this is not a Christian, this man, right? He's a nice man from Sri Lanka. And he said, right, so we've now got this eating thing. And we said, yes, you're a gastroenterologist. And he said, yes. So you know about swallows up here. He said, well, it's not really my thing, but, and he said it like this, he said, if Jack and God can win, can sort out this other thing around the bowel, then why can't they sort out the swallow thing? And we go, and I remember saying, because Great Ormond Street said they can't, or something like that. And he said, let's ask them again. And he wrote a letter to Great Ormond Street. And I've seen the letter back, which was said, he cannot eat. You should not try it because you'll give him a lung infection and you could kill him and you would be responsible. Something along those lines. So he read this out to us in the next one and said, so should we try it? And Sharon said to him, only if you'll take responsibility for the problem. So you have to have him in hospital and you have to look after him. So Jack went into hospital last summer for 2 weeks. And the idea was that it takes about a week to get pneumonia, basically. If you put food in your mouth and it goes the wrong way and it ends up in your lung, and if you don't cough or choke, which basically that's what Great Ormond Street was saying, is that he doesn't cough or choke. So it just goes in and sits there and waits until it goes off, and when it goes off, it kills you, That's the problem. So he said, well, we'll look after him for 2 weeks. We'll get him eating on the first day, and therefore he should have pneumonia by the end if Great Ormond Street are right. So they tested a few things, and by the time he came home, he was eating 75% of his food as porridge level. They're not happy with liquid yet, and they're not happy with solids, because Jack has never chewed food. So he just kind of puts it in his mouth and goes, which, if it's a large piece of carrot, it's a bit dangerous for all of us, really, isn't it, if you don't chew it. So he still has not got chewing. There's a whole discussion about that. But 75% of his food goes in his mouth. And that's impossible, according to Great Ormond Street, but not according to Dr. Afzal, who went, this is remarkable, isn't it? This is remarkable. He said 2 things are important here. 1, you are right to have faith in God. 2, Great Ormond Street were wrong and Southampton Hospital was right. He's great fun. So anyway, things happen. And when they happen, you get excited, don't you? You just do.